despite it all looking good on paper, none of this is working. And it wasn't until I really sat down and understand, how do I want to show up in the world? What matters to me? And figuring that out changed everything. And that is what then informs how I show up for everything, including rest being a part of that.
Welcome to Just Rest, burnout tips for everyday radicals who are tired but not giving up. I'm your host, Nicole Havelka, bringing you tips and inspiration to help you feel seen and supported on your radical rest journey. Let's go. Hi, Rest Rebels. This is Nicole Havelka, your host of Just Rest, burnout tips for everyday radicals, for people who are tired but not giving up. And I have the pleasure of being here today with my friend and my coach and one of my inspirations for business, Becky Mollenkamp.
Hello.
Hi, Becky. Let me tell you a little bit about Becky, who is pretty awesome. Becky is a feminist business coach for service-based entrepreneurs who want to build a human-first business that honor collective flourishing over profit at all costs growth. And as a moment of personal privilege, I just have to say that without Becky, I would have probably given up on my business like 4 or 5 years ago. And I certainly wouldn't have started this podcast because I'm part of her feminist podcast collective, which Becky founded. And for a year, they nurtured me before I even launched this podcast. So how wonderful is that? You all can thank them as well for giving me that space and helping me figure out how to do this podcast and still figure it out every single day, which we do together, right, Becky? This isn't it's certainly a two-way street in the Feminist Podcast Collective and in any space that you create. So welcome, Becky. I'm so glad that you're here.
Thanks for having me. Yes, collective flourishing above all. And we're all excited to have your podcast in the world.
Oh, thank you. I'm so excited. I love doing this. So thank you so much for encouraging me because it is hard and intimidating to get this started. That's for sure.
It is, but it also becomes addictive. So watch out because I'm about to launch my 4th podcast.
Oh my gosh. I have like 3 other ideas that I'm trying to keep on the back burner so that I'm not too overwhelmed. Good thing this one takes a lot of time because it's keeping me from starting more, but you never know. Give it a year and we'll see how we end up then, right? So before getting into my questions for you and hearing more about what you're doing in the world, would you pause with me and with the Rest Rebels who are listening and take a deep breath with me? So just an inhale, make that as full and complete as feels right to you today. And then a long and as slow as you can make it, exhale. And I've been saying this at every time I've done this on the pod, but it makes me feel so much better and centered and grounded to do that simple practice before I get started. So
I agree.
For doing that with me, right? It makes everything so much better to just say, okay, we're going to pause. We're going to be in our body for a second and look what can happen with just a few seconds and a breath. I love it. So I'm really excited to have you here and to learn more about your journeys. Well, one of the things I'm learning, let's say, is that most entrepreneurs, I think, have a burnout story or even stories plural. And I'm wondering about your own journey with burnout and rest and how that relationship has evolved as you've had your business, which has been you've been in business for yourself for a very long time, but many iterations to your business over time, right?
I've been self-employed since 2005.
Yeah, that's a long time.
21 years. And started out in freelance writing / corporate marketing and then evolved into coaching. And the impetus for leaving wasn't so much, I don't know, you tell me if it's burnout. It felt more like corporate frustration than corporate burnout, but maybe they're one and the same in that I had a micromanager-y boss who didn't let off the reins. And I always felt like I was being watched, judged, and it made everything feel way more stressful. I got to the point where I was crying and like upset about just having to go to work. I went on antidepressants as a sort of temporary solution in that case, because it was just situational of needing to get through. Once I made the decision I was going to quit, and I created a 6-month off ramp for myself to be able to do that, to start my own business. And during those 6 months, I was on antidepressants just to help me go into work because it was so draining and exhausting. It wasn't. It was emotionally exhausting. So as I'm talking about it, I guess that is a form of burnout, right? That emotional
It is.
exhaustion. It wasn't that I was overworked necessarily. It was that I was emotionally drained and burned out from having a really sort of toxic experience at work that made it just not something I even wanted to do. And so that
Yeah.
was really challenging. Since then, I've had, I guess, variations on burnout, which feel more like, after I say I'm starting a 4th podcast, biting off more than I can chew.
Yeah. Yeah.
I tend to have less of that stuff now as my own boss than when I was working for someone else. Because for me, the thing that is more draining is less workload and more emotional drain. I can churn like I work fast. I've always worked fast. I don't get too caught up in perfectionism. I just and when I have an idea, I create and I go into do kind of mode. I don't spend a lot of time thinking. There's not a lot of pause between thought and action for me. So it's not, having too much on my plate is usually not the problem. It's more when I have an emotional burnout sort of a thing, something that
Hmm.
wears me out. So as an example, I'm a really hardcore introvert, and that's only gotten worse as I've gotten, or has gotten more extreme as I've gotten older. It's not bad, but has
Right.
become a more apparent to me as I've gotten older. So if I build in too much peopling time in my schedule, that can start to lead to sort of a form of burnout for me, because it's just like I get emotionally drained. And then that motor that's always humming for me, it gets harder to act on it. So it's not because I have too much on my plate for when I'm showing up my full self. I have too much on my plate when I'm not able to be my full self, which is usually the result for me of too much peopling and not enough spaciousness and solitude built into my schedule. But that
Right.
doesn't happen as much anymore. And really, in the last, 2 decades of being self-employed, I've had only smaller bouts of that, and it's usually much smaller and more quick for me to kind of navigate than like that corporate example, which was 6 months of more than 6 months of just like not dreading work.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you're hitting on a number of points that are ring true for me too, which we have different experiences, but the same in some other ways, which, I also found like the workspaces I was in to be too confining, again, for slightly different reasons. I didn't necessarily have micromanaging people at that point when I was leaving the church that I was working for. But I did have, there was what hemmed me in were the role expectations. I think it's on some level, and we can talk more about this and maybe how it contributes to burnout too, is that like the spaces we're in don't align with our values, even if we can't say what they are yet. Like in
Yeah.
2005, you might not have been able to say what those values are, which you've now articulated in a
Yeah.
book,
Yeah.
right?
No, I definitely couldn't have then.
No, you didn't have words for it at the time. And for that matter, the culture maybe have caught up with the feeling that you had, but you're like, I know I can't do this anymore and I need to leave.
Mhm.
And I've certainly had those. I've had those moments. And emotional exhaustion is actually one of the first, or one of the three sort of hallmarks of burnout.
Yeah, I think
So
that
that's true.
as I was saying it, I was like, yeah, I guess that is what it is. But I think too often our mind, when we think about burnout, we're thinking about like somebody who's just like, I can't do this much work. Like in my mind, anyway, it's more of like overwork than
Yeah.
overwhelm. And
Yeah.
my feelings tend to be more on the like overwhelmed by the emotional burden and that kind of overload on my emotional mental systems than like just the actual to-do list. And when I think about that workspace, like it felt like a straitjacket, I think. And maybe that's sort of what you're talking about
Mm,
too, where I
yeah.
felt like, first of all, I was in a creative field. I was a magazine editor. It's supposed to be a creative business, a creative industry. We were doing photo shoots, and a lot of the things I did were really fun. The problem is I have always struggled with you have to be creative at 9 and then you can turn it off at 5, right? Like here's your hours. Now turn on
Right.
the creativity, muscle and then just turn it off. Like
Right.
it's not how creativity works. And that was always very challenging. The idea of corporatizing creativity it's just as baffling to me. And we still do it, but it doesn't really work well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was hard. The misalignment with the styles of between my manager and myself, some of my coworkers and myself, and then just that corporate, because when I started at that job, it's amazing. I was only there for 5 years, and the radical shift from when I got there in 2000 and when I left in 2005, it was a privately owned company that had a 100-year track record of being privately owned, well respected, treated its employees well, was in little old Des Moines, Iowa, had been headquartered there, was always based there. It was and when I got there, I remember one time asking what's my budget on this story for the photo shoot. And they're like, we don't have budgets. You just do what you need to do to make it really good. That's what we care about. Like quality is what matters. There's not a budget.
Yeah. Huh.
Um, that, and then within 2 years of that company going public, which I think speaks to a lot of this,
Oh,
and becoming a
interesting.
publicly owned on the stock
Right.
market private company, and what that evolved and how it continues to evolve. There were almost layoffs were unheard of when it was privately owned. It barely happened. They would move people around, shuffle things, make it work. As soon as it became public, these rounds of layoffs became a ever increasing thing
Yeah.
where first it was like, what is this? And then all the talk. And then it just started to feel like, oh, here we are. Here's our next 6 month or 3 month round of layoffs. It just became a cost of doing business, the average thing. And all of us started to really understand that we were nothing more than numbers. And maybe we always had been to a degree, but it became at a level that was just unbelievable. And this was my sort of first, I mean, I'd worked a couple smaller jobs. This was my first like big important job. And
Hmm.
that corporate experience really, and I didn't understand it at the time, right? But I now know that those expectations and how they shifted, and how I knew I became nothing more than a number who constantly had to prove my worth as what it felt like as a human. Like I had to
Yeah.
prove that I was worthy of staying on, worthy of being paid. I constantly felt at threat, like because I didn't know when those pink slips were coming, right? And I would see friends of mine all around me losing their jobs all the time. People who I knew were talented, who I knew were good at
Right.
what they've done, who I knew had given so much of their life to this company. And I think that like that does something to your nervous system for sure,
Totally.
right? And it
Yeah.
was very out of alignment with how I showed up, and all of it began to feel very like this straitjacket. And I think that's what
Hmm.
all it wasn't just the boss. I can say it was just the boss, but it wasn't just the boss. That was
Yeah.
part of it. But it was really this bigger feeling of I am, and I remember that. I mean, I was only, I was in my early 20s, and I remember that,
Yeah.
or mid 20s, and I remember that feeling of like I am nothing to these people. Like I am
Mm-hmm.
replaceable. I don't matter. It
Right.
doesn't matter how great I am. I ultimately don't really matter to them. And I have to constantly, like, I am only as good as how I show up today and what
Yeah.
I do for them, because our magazines had to prove their worth, right? We had to make a certain
Yeah.
amount of money, and the bar kept getting higher and higher as the company was public. So
Yeah.
yeah, all of that didn't feel good. It doesn't feel good. And I think
No.
so many people in corporate America can relate to that feeling of like
Some
just feeling inhuman in many
right.
ways.
And used, and for that matter, it's normal, right?
Yeah,
Like this is just how it is. I think a lot of people maybe don't even allow themselves or feel what you were feeling. Not again, not because it's in any fault of their own, but because it's like, well, this is just how it is, and I've
exactly. I
come
think
to accept it.
we accept all of that as the cost of doing business, just the way it is. This is just what the world is like. I mean, people will say that kind of thing,
Right.
especially to younger generations, to sort of beat their idealism out of them. You will
Right.
hear, and we can blame it on boomers, but I see Gen Xers now doing it. We take up
Right.
the mantle because it's just like, well, I didn't get any different, so why should you? Like, this is just
Right.
how it's going to be. And we anyone who has any vision of what it could look like for things to function differently is ridiculed, belittled, whatever it is, to get that out of their system so that they fall in line. And soon enough, they're the same ones saying, well, this is just how it is, kid. This is the way it's always been and always
Mhm.
will be. And that's
Right.
not true. That's not true. It is not
Right.
how it's always been.
No.
And
It's
I don't think it has to be how it always will be. But things don't change when we all just say, well, it's just the way it is.
right. Well, right. Accepting it as the status quo is just going to let the same thing happen over and over and
Well,
over
yeah,
again.
because then we pass that harm on, right? Like,
Hmm.
well, I suffer all the time and this is hard for me and I'm overworked or I'm overwhelmed or I feel used, I feel belittled. Why should it be any different for you? And if I accept that that's just the norm, then I now, as I move into a leadership position in a company, just continue the same thing for the next group of people. And then the burnout, it just is, it becomes I mean, I think corporations really look at burnout as a cost of doing business. And that is really unfortunate,
Right, right.
really inhumane.
Oh, very inhumane, and treats people like, a commodity or product to be
Exactly. It's,
used,
oh, well,
not as
first on the
people.
car, because exactly, we think of our car and we think, well, eventually the motor runs out, right? That's just
Right,
the cost of running the car, and eventually we'll have to replace it. And humans become cogs in the wheel, motors in the engine
right,
that have a shelf life, and we know we're going to use them until we deplete them. And then maybe they leave and they go take their vacation or do what it is they got to do until they
yeah,
move on to somewhere else. And that's just the cost of doing business. We'll replace them. And by the way, usually with someone who's younger because they have more energy, more capacity, and we don't, that's all we value. We see them only as
right,
a part. So why wouldn't we want the youngest and cheapest part we can get, which,
right,
despite what the protections may say by the government, ageism very much exists inside of the business space, right?
for
Not to
sure.
mention ableism and all of the other things. And so,
Right.
yeah, corporations they are not human, right? Just like AI
No.
is not human, and they are evaluating things through only a logical mind. So no humanity inside of that. It is just this person, which is this part in the business, costs this much, and we get this much out of them, and then here's this other part that we could bring in instead, and it only costs this much, and it has an extra 10 years on it. We're going to take that one, right? And it is, I mean, I think when we start to really think of it that way and really understand that's really what business is in the late stage capitalism model in which we exist, it grosses us out. We realize how really awful it is.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I know that you don't consider yourself a religious person, but would you love that laugh? Right, I know that because we've known each other long enough for us to know that. But would you say that there's a spiritual, cultural, or maybe another way of putting it is like a values sort of informed foundation to your rest practice, especially considering that corporate experience is a backdrop?
Everything for me is values. Everything. Everything, everything, everything. Whether those values are rooted in spirituality, religion, whatever else it may be, like for me, they aren't necessarily, but if you hear them and say, yeah, that is what that is, then that's fine. But for me, my life is guided by values, right? And that informs everything I do, all of my business decisions, all of my life decisions, my parenting decisions, everything. It's like, if I and that's what I couldn't articulate back in my corporate days, right? I didn't know what those were. I couldn't understand any of that. I just reached a point in my life where I knew something's not right. This
Hmm.
isn't good. This isn't working. Despite it all looking good on paper, none of this is working. And it wasn't until I really sat down and understand, how do I want to show up in the world? What matters to me? And figuring that out changed everything. And that is what then informs how I show up for everything, including rest being a part of that. Because
Hmm.
at the core of really what my value set is like at the very core of it, it is we are all humans having a human experience on this floating rock. And what matters most is honoring each of us in our full humanity. Like, meaning exactly how you were born. This may sound religious or spiritual, and maybe it is. I don't think any of us were born a mistake. I don't think any of
Hmm.
us were born wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong inherently with any of us. I think systems and other things can begin to corrupt us, but I think we come into this realm a beautiful, perfect soul, spirit, whatever it is. And everything else begins to corrupt that in a way. But in ourselves, we are perfectly formed. And I think that what matters most is, how do we honor that fullness of who we are, the uniqueness of who each of us is. And I think rest is one of the ways that we do that, right? We honor the fact that I get tired. I honor the fact that I have a lot of things that I want to accomplish and do because that honors my interests and goals. And to be able to do that, I need capacity, which, requires rest. I also like to rest because it feels good and it's fun. But all of those things honor the fullness of who I am as a human. And so that is what informs my feelings about rest. And it's just it's it's just being human. I don't know, it seems so simple, but that I think I didn't used to honor that. I know I didn't used to honor that. I did not honor my
Right.
full humanity
Yeah.
until late in my 30s, into my 40s.
Yeah. Right. Well, and that, I mean, some of it is just at some age we lose the capacity, right? To grind in the
We
same way
run
that
out
we
of effort
did
to give.
when we were young,
Oh, that too.
right?
Yeah.
Right, we do run out. So that's part of it, I think, but I think you also alluded to it when your story about being in your 20s and being in a corporate environment, right? There was this expectation that you would just show up and be creative from 9 to 5, which, like you pointed out, is ludicrous. Like, that's not how it works. Like, creativity actually demands a lot of rest.
It does. And inspiration, which you can't just
Hmm.
get sitting in you can't always get sitting in a fluorescent lit
Right.
cubicle. That's not going to lead to inspiration. I can't do it when
Yeah.
I'm tired and
Right.
I can't do it when I have somebody yelling at me, right? There's all
Right.
these things that affect being able to, um, feel creative. And that isn't, that, that isn't corporate America usually. And yeah, I
No.
have to be well rested. And it's hard to do that when you're hearing, we have to get this done by this date, and
Right.
that's not a restful, creative, spacious, expansive experience. I mean, creativity is about expansiveness. It's about what's
Right.
possible. You have to be able to have spaciousness to feel creative. And you don't have that inside of these restraints, again, where I felt like I was in the straitjacket.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Like, I love that image actually of the straitjacket because it sort of feels like the right thing to me. I'm like, oh, right. That's exactly what it feels like. Or like something is crushing your breathing, like you can't breathe. And
Mhm.
haven't ever been in a straitjacket. I can only assume it would depress your breathing, given how it confines you. So you're feeling like you can't be the fullness of who you are
Right, because you don't have
within
agency.
the
And
context.
that's the whole point of the straitjacket, right? Is to remove agency. It's to remove your control over your own body. And
Right.
that's what corporate America has often, it feels like for many people. And I think not just corporate America, I think all parts of our lives until we
Right.
really do some of this work can feel that way, where we feel like we don't have control. I'm sure you hear this all the time for people with rest. It's like, I don't have time for that. I can't make time for that, right?
Right.
I can't
Totally.
change this or that to do that. And it's like, it is that we truly, whether it's actually real or not, we believe and feel like we have no control over our
Right.
own time. And that is that restrictive, you know, how can I take a nap when I don't have control over my time? Right.
Right.
And so we have to free ourselves from whatever your straitjacket is, whether that's the, corporate experience or the capitalist conditioning you're bringing into your own life, whatever it is, those straitjackets that keep us from feeling in control, so that we can take back that control and say, I do have control and I can take this time for rest, whatever rest looks like for me.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And I know that I even have the same problem to some degree inside my own business, and maybe this can be a good segue to get you to talk a little bit more about your book, that I was actually pretty good at taking time for rest when I worked for other people. I was actually better at it than I am as a small business owner in a lot of ways. When I worked for other people, like, there's paid time off. Now, that came at the expense of, like, also there were times when you're like, you just have to work and you have no options. Like, if I was running a big event or something like that, you were working, like, there were weeks where it was like a 24/7 almost kind of experience because of that. But when I was out, I was out. I was pretty good at shutting it off. And I have a yoga and meditation practice. I had all these things that help me rest and renew. Of course, eventually that wasn't enough because of all the other stuff we've already talked about, because the rest doesn't compensate for all the other nonsense at some point. Uh, in the context of having my own business, there's always this internalized, I mean, it's all the internalized stuff from all those other voices, right? Internalized stuff telling me, oh, you have to do one more thing or you're not going to make enough money. Like
Mm,
there's this looming fear always of not making enough or not being appearing successful enough or whatever that nonsense is in our head. But I know that I have a harder time shutting it off as a small business owner. And I know that's different for different people, but that has been my experience. I probably work more hours, or even if not more hours, I don't take as much time off as I
yeah.
did, or chunks of time like I used to.
Well, I work more than I did in corporate America because the amount of time you actually work in corporate America for some jobs can be pretty ludicrous because
Right.
there's a lot of water cooler time. There's a lot of unproductive meetings. There's a lot of like the
That's true.
actual work time
Right.
was like often very limited, which could be
Yeah.
frustrating because sometimes it meant we
Right.
have to take work home to actually get the work done because there's no time during the work day to get work done.
Right.
Um, but anyway, that said, when we
Correct.
go to work for ourselves, sometimes we reproduce exactly what we have experienced inside of corporate America or capitalism, wherever it is, right? We
Mhm.
end up being that boss for ourselves we hated. Other times we almost rebel and do the exact opposite. And that can also, though, be just as toxic because maybe we now, like I know when I left, I was like, I just want to work in my pajamas when I want to work. Well, it sounds lovely. And it kind of was because it was like the other extreme. But what it ended up meaning was sometimes I was working till 2 a.m. because I was like,
Yeah.
I just want to work. I don't want to work during the day and I'm going to go do my errands and run and play and whatever. And then suddenly it's like, oh, but I actually have
Oh, wait, I
projects.
have to turn something in to
Right,
a
I got to pay the
client.
bills and I have a
Right.
project that I have to do. So now I am at 2 in the morning trying to get it done before it's due in the morning. Right.
Right.
So you can kind of go to the other extreme as well. And then that can be just as problematic. But I think one of the key words you said there was enough, right? What's enough? Because if we don't define for ourselves what our own enough is and what success means to us outside of the systems, then we will be churning and churning and churning all the time because capitalism teaches us there isn't enough. There is never enough. Capitalism's only message is more, right? It needs us to be consumers, constant consumers of more to function. That's what capitalism is, right? It is about extraction and constant growth. And so that doesn't happen unless we are all consuming more. The reason my company that I used to work for got so toxic was because it entered into that public domain where instead of it being about an individual family saying how much is enough for us as a family for
Yeah.
profits, and we have wiggle room in there and we can say, no, we don't need to make more this year. Maybe we even make a little less
Yeah.
so that we can keep our
Right.
people on payroll, right? When you shift to your only obligation is to shareholders who need more, they
Right.
always need more. They've got, if you made me $6, now it's got to go to 650 or I've made no money. It has
Right.
to constantly go
Right.
up. There is no going down. It has to go up. When that becomes the only metric is more, it never ends. You can't stop. You are now on that hamster wheel that now you're
Right.
out of control. You're like the hamster who's like, right? And we often do that for ourselves. If we don't know what our enough is, we are in the pursuit of endless more. So we have to get
Yeah.
clear about that first and foremost when we go into business for ourselves. What is enough for me? Enough
Right.
money, but also enough work hours to achieve that, enough time spent to do that, enough visibility, enough whatever the things are. And also what's enough rest to allow me to do that, right? We often
Yeah.
only think of the enough being what's my enough money, but I also need to factor in what is enough rest? What is enough joy? What are the things that are going to keep my engine going? But then I would also wouldn't say push back, but I would just say that for me and for some people, when we go into work for ourselves and remove all of those other constraints that we've had, where we're making other people money, where we're doing it the way they tell us it has to be done, all of that, when we go into work for ourselves and we're making money for ourselves, doing it the way we want to do it, and often doing the thing that we really want to do, sometimes the work does feel restorative. So
Mm.
in my case,
Right.
I love to work. I used to
Right.
hate work. Remember, I was dreading going to work. I would cry about
Yeah.
every
Yeah.
now I would rather be at work than a lot of things. And it's not because I'm a workaholic. And it's not because I'm like, oh, I'm panicked. It's because my work feels restorative to me. It actually gives
Mhm.
me energy. It makes me excited. It lights me up. It's part of what makes me feel good and whole. It's part of how I feel like I'm giving back. So for some of us, we might be working more, but it's actually part of our rest practice. It's part of the
Yeah.
restorative practice
Oh.
that makes us
Yeah.
feel
Yeah.
good. But we have to watch for that to make sure, is that true for me, right? Or am I working for all these other reasons, these scarcity reasons, the fear reasons?
Right.
Because if that's the case, then I think it's more about doing some of this actual evaluation of what is enough. What is my actual goal? Because the goal can't just be more. When people say, well, I want to make 6 figures, I want to make 7 figures, that's not that's a number, but it's not a real goal. It's not why. Why do you need to make 6 figures? And what
Yeah.
is the actual number? Because 6 figures could look like 100,000. It could look like 999,000. How much
Yeah.
is actually enough to fund the life that you're wanting to fund? And then there are times too, Nicole, that it's just the reality of, you still live in a capitalist system. You don't get to check out of it just because you became self-employed.
Right.
The mortgage has to get paid, and that, or the rent has to get paid, the car, those things have to happen. And sometimes you do have to work more than you want to work because you just got to pay the bills, because we live in the
Right.
reality of that's what it takes. There are things that we can do, some levers we can pull. Can I charge a little more so that I'm having to work a little less to make it? There are things like that. But I think we also have to honor that lived experience and the reality of sometimes being self-employed is hard. And there
It
are
is.
challenges. Making
Yeah.
money it's not like you become self-employed and suddenly people are just throwing money at you.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
gotta figure out how, and it's challenging, and it may mean you have to work more because your fears around money may very well be valid. And we have to honor that
Right.
for ourselves too, right? So the answer to that is not easy because there's different places you can go with that. Sometimes it's about recreating the harm that you were already experiencing because you don't know another way. Sometimes it's about, I don't actually know what I actually need, so I'm just in the ever ending pursuit of more, and that's why I'm always working. It could be that you actually like your work and the work is restorative, and that's
Yeah.
valid. And it may be because the reality is just, damn it, I have to make more. And that sucks that I live inside this capitalist system, but it is what it is. And so I have to work more until I'm able to figure things out so that I'm not having to work as hard. So, like,
Right.
all of those things are real. And sometimes it's multiples of those things.
Yeah. Yeah. So how is all of that, like, couple of decades now of experience, factoring into the book that you have written and that will be out at the end of April? So tell me more about that, how all of that factors in, and then why now? I mean, you talked about being a writer since you were, in your 20s, in your early days of your career. So why? And so you've been published in a lot of ways before this,
Oh,
but
for
why
sure.
write the book now?
But I've never written a book. So first of all, it's
Yeah.
called Liberate Your Business. There it is
Woo!
on the cover. It's a radical guide for entrepreneurs building inside a broken system, because the system is broken. So that is
Correct.
that part of, we have to be able to honor that full experience of the fact that I don't get to opt out of the system. So telling me to
Yeah.
be fully anti-capitalist doesn't work inside of a capitalist system. But how do I function in a way that honors my the fullness of my humanity inside of a system that doesn't, right? What are
Hmm.
the things that I can do? And I think that the key is that, and where I think too many business books want to be really black and white, really binary about things and really simplify things. And usually that means just through my lived experience. So if I'm a privileged white person who's had a great experience, I say, well, why can't you do it? I did it. So here's the 1, 2, 3 formula. It should work for you. It worked for me. That doesn't factor in all of the many differences in how each of us show up and what our lived experience actually is. And so I couldn't find the book I wanted. The book I definitely would have wanted a
Mm.
decade, 20 years ago when I started my business, 10 years ago when I shifted to coaching, or even now. Every business book I read, and I haven't read them all, so I'm sure there's great ones out there, but most of them I read are written very much through one lens and don't feel like they're very honoring of the fullness of our humanity. And so much of it is focused on capitalist vision of what a business should be. And
Yeah.
again, or it's this like way outside, way left field, anti-capitalist thing that doesn't really honor the reality of where we are. And I wanted to find that thing that sort of straddles those two of, and kind of in the answer I gave you about rest, where it's like, it can be multiple things, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes it is, I'm just recreating capitalism. Okay, let me address that. Sometimes it is, I can't change the reality. And so I have to exist inside of it. And how do I then honor myself and love myself through that? Right? Because that's
Hmm.
also real. I'm tired of these sort of prescriptive, just think better and it'll change for you, that coming from some privileged white woman usually, or white man, that doesn't honor that not all of us can just think our way out of the reality of being single and having to figure this out, or being a single parent even harder, or, the
Yeah.
multitudes of ways that we show up that just aren't as simple as, well, I have a rich husband who's funding this and letting me now to show up this way. Or even if I didn't, but I built this business in 2005 and business looks very different today, but I'm still telling you it's just as easy, right? I
Right.
just think we needed a different model. And so I wanted to write it. And why now? One, because it has been like pulling at me for a long time.
Mm.
Two, I finally was dealing with enough of the internal stuff, although it's still there, to not feel all of the, who am I to write this book? That's still there, but I was able to at least move beyond that enough to do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And three, and really key, and this is hard because when we talk about a liberated business, AI is a question that comes up. But for me, with my executive functioning issues that I believe I have undiagnosed ADHD, whatever it is, I definitely have executive functioning issues. The idea of trying to put together a book of this size without some help, and I couldn't afford to hire a
Yeah.
developmental editor, having AI be able to help me in that role as sort of the developmental editor to say, here's all the content you already have. Here's a way that that you can like formulate that and make it make sense. That allowed me then to be able to like say, okay, now I'm just writing a little bit at a time. I
Yeah.
understand how it's going to work. The big mess of everything was too much for me. And that's really what has held me back for a long time. It's just like,
Yeah.
I don't know where to start. And how often do we hear people say that? And I do think for me and choices that I'm making in my life, we all have to make our own. That is where AI has really been helpful. It's helping me be able to make sense of content it's helping me make sense of big ideas and lots of stuff that my brain previously would absolutely slow down on. That would stop my ADHD brain of like, I forget it. I'm shut down. I can't continue.
Yeah.
I wrote the book, but AI did help me get the ideas to a place where I could see how to write the book, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
that's been an
Yeah.
important piece of it to me too, for the timing.
Yeah. So, yeah. So it is like it's a developmental editor essentially, or an editing coach, or a book writing coach of some sort,
Right.
who can help you get over the humps, at least that you had,
Yeah, and I wish
for
I could
getting that
afford
book
to
out
hire
there.
somebody to do that. I am not in a position to be able to do that.
Right.
So
Right.
this has allowed me to do that.
Yeah.
And it was a lifelong dream to be a published author, and
Hmm.
goal checked. Like, I have a book that people can
You
buy
do. It's
and
right
that
there in your hand.
I can hold, others will be able to hold soon. And that feels really exciting. And then anything
It
else that happens is
is. It
gravy.
is. And, and I actually posted this today on social media,
I
the
know I
day that we're
saw, and it was like,
recording, that like, this is the book that I wish I had had, 4 or 5 years ago. Fortunately, I met you at that time. And so the ideas that are now in this book, like, were, I've been absorbing over the last
yeah,
several years. But I remember it was just so important to me to hear from someone who was like, you don't have to do, even just to say, there aren't, like, you don't have to do what everyone else tells you works. I mean, one of the best examples I can think of, or one of the simplest examples anyway, was like what they say you should do when you're launching something, and how many marketing emails you should send. That's and it was exhausting to me, and I realized, not just because it's a lot of work, which it is. And of course, I didn't have, which makes me sound really old, but it was probably 3 years ago. Like, I bet we didn't have AI back then,
right.
helping me churn out lots of content. Like, I was writing every one of those emails myself. And so and it just is a lot of work, and draining work. I actually love to write, but I also know that I have limited chunks in a day that I
Yeah,
can spend
we all
writing.
do, right? There's only
Right.
so much
That
time
kind
that
of
we can.
creative, high energy work, I only have so many. I always say, now I just say, I got about 2 hours of that a day, and if at most. And
Mhm.
that's provided that all the planets have aligned and I got enough sleep and all that jazz, right? But for someone, just both you and then your podcast and just other groups I've been in with you, introducing the idea of like feminist aligned approaches to marketing, which includes like ample consent, making sure people have consented. And the idea that I use, I can't remember who I got it from, maybe someone from one of your podcasts, where you give people the option to opt out, which I do
Kelly
now
Deal,
anytime. Kelly Deal, thank you.
who's in the book as well.
Who's
Yes.
in the book. Awesome. And who I also follow on other socials. I don't think we've met yet, but I've followed.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Feminist
yeah.
marketing.
Well,
Yeah.
and that was one of the things that I learned from you and from her, that was like, oh, you can create a way for people to opt out of a sequence.
Mhm.
And I do that with anytime I'm doing a, like, hey, you don't want to hear any more about this offer? Fine, just click this. And what's really interesting is that very few people do it. But I'm always so glad that the people who did, and then they're not getting the 5, and I don't do
Because otherwise
12,
they probably
20
would have opted
emails
out of your
anymore.
email list
They
altogether.
would have
Right.
unsubscribed. It actually keeps subscribers,
Mhm.
but they're like, hey, this isn't the reason I'm on your email list, or I don't have the bandwidth today to
Right.
even listen
Or
to
this
it, or
is the
whatever the
time.
reason is, right? Yeah, maybe a timing issue, but maybe that means they're not going to be annoyed with me next time I launch, and they're actually going to engage. It's a long game. It's not like trying to win sales right now for shareholders. Now, neither of us have shareholders to appease, right? But it's not that short-term sales strategy. It's a long-term, more relationship based.
And that is, to me, the fundamental, I think, message of this book is, again, going back to humanity. It is about being in right relation with yourself, with your team, if you have one, with your clients, with your larger community, being in right relation, and being in relationship. Right. And that is what's missing, because capitalism is about transaction, right? That is all that it is. It is just about, how do I extract from you, whether that's money or your time or whatever it is. I just want to take from you. And if I have to give, I'm going to figure out how do I give as little as I can. And that is not what this is about. This is about, how do we make sure that we each feel whole through this experience. And that is what a relationship should be. And that's, going back to those people who say this is the way it's always been. Well, that's not true. And in fact, through most of humanity, commerce is not the problem. It's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about capitalism, which is a form of commerce. But commerce in and of itself, which is just an exchange, that has existed throughout humanity and has, for most of humanity, been about making each other whole. So if I'm taking 10 ears of corn, what would make you whole for that? Does that look like, I'm going to watch your kids for an hour? I'm going to knit you a sweater, whatever it is, right? It's, how do I make you whole? And because that corn is now going to make me whole, it's going to feed my family tonight. And that's what I needed. What is it that you need today to make you whole? And we work together as collective people, as people who exist on a planet together, in a community together. And we figure out, how do we make sure that we're both whole, right? That's what commerce should be, and is really at its core is about. And that is how it's functioned for most of humanity. Capitalism is a form of commerce, and it is what has perverted commerce into what it is now. And that is fully about extraction. It is only about, how do those who have the ownership class, that have the means, how do they take as much as they can from those who create to enrich themselves as much as possible? That is a very different model than, how do we both come out of this feeling whole? And that continues to get worse and worse over time. And that is what I'm like, how do we fight that at the individual level? Because we recreate it for ourselves unknowingly all the time, because it is the model, it is the air that we breathe. We all, especially here in the US at least, and most of Western culture, and in fact, most of the globe, we are just breathing capitalism. It's what we know. That's the only form of commerce many of us have ever even experienced. We don't understand there are other ways to look at commerce, which include things like mutual aid. It includes things like bartering. It includes things like equitable pricing. There are other ways of showing up and doing commerce that feel far more healthy and more aligned, make you feel better at the end of the experience, because they're not just transactional, they are relational. And that's what I want to try to shift. And that's, that makes all the difference, is that relational experience, even down to your marketing choices. And the book really talks about all of those. There's 25 chapters that explore everything from rest and productivity, and then leadership, hiring, also talking about marketing and visibility, all of the different components of our business. It's thinking about, how do we think about all of these in that way that is more honoring of a full humanity, that is about, how do we all leave this experience feeling whole?
And would you say that idea of everyone leaving the experience feeling whole as sort of the key idea you want people to take away from the book, or something else, or more than that?
I don't know. That's a great question, because I do love that. But I would say maybe at the more immediate individual level, I think that's part of it. But I think it's even starting with ourselves to ask ourselves what's enough, because it's kind of hard to know what would make me whole if I don't even know what I need or what enough looks like for me, right? Because if you don't, then there's never making me whole. I'll never be whole because no, I want even more. I want more and more and more. So I
Right.
really think it starts at that place of understanding for yourself, what is enough for you? We are not encouraged to explore that question inside of capitalism ever. And I think it's important for us to, not what's more, what else could I have? It's not like because could I have a house with like an indoor and an outdoor pool, a personal chef, a blah, blah, blah? Sure, I could. But do I need that? Is that really what would be enough to make me have a life that feels really good? No, enough to have a life that feels really good is probably this house I'm in, maybe upgraded a little, but like, I don't need
Yeah.
a mission to have enough. Would would it feel better? Maybe, but is it enough? Like, is that really what I need for enough? No. And I think in capitalism, we are conditioned to think that enough is settling, and settling is not what I'm talking about. I'm not saying I have to settle. I'm asking myself, what do I actually want and need? What do I
Yeah.
really need to feel like I have enough in this world? Because for most of us, the answer is not all of the stuff. It's who's in the house with us, how I'm spending my time with those people that are in the house with me, right? It's
Yeah.
what I'm doing all day long, who I'm helping. Like, those are the things that really make life feel like enough. And so when we can get to a place of clarity about that for ourselves, then that other piece of, now, how do I show up in relationship with others, becomes a little bit easier, because now it's like, okay, could I charge you $7,000 for this pen? Sure. Maybe some person would buy it. We see those stories all the time, but is that what I actually need to be whole here? Probably not. Maybe the pen cost me $1. If I sell enough pens for $4, then I can have that. I can live the life I was wanting to live. And that would be
Hmm.
enough. So I can charge you 7,000 or 4. 7,000, sure. I could have 12 homes. I could build a bunker in Hawaii, like, next door to Zuckerberg. But do I really need that? No. I want to be able to sell you the $4 pen so you feel whole because you got the pen you needed. You could actually afford it. And you helped me be able to make sure that I can, like, feed my family and be in this house that feels comfortable. Like, that's it.
Yeah.
And I just think it's such a beautiful and simple message. And yet, too many of us, because of capitalism, have been made to feel like that's not good enough. How sad is it?
No, no. Well, and then if we're not accumulating
Exactly.
constantly, like that somehow makes us bad or wrong. And the reality is that the more you accumulate, like let's say you got that, in-ground pool in your backyard or whatever, you got a bigger house with an in-ground pool or something like that. Now you're having to work harder to maintain those things and add something else. The next thing you have to do is furnish it and have all the deck furniture or whatever. And that's just one somewhat silly example, but
It's
like
not,
that's how
though.
it works,
That's exactly
right?
how it works. And
Yeah.
it does that by design, because
Yeah.
when the system is never ending growth, and that is, I mean, you look at the stock market
Yeah.
and you see companies that have a stock value of $1,000 a share, and it's not enough.
Hmm.
Stockholders will not be happy unless tomorrow it is $1,001 a share, right?
Hmm.
So it's
Right.
always got to be more. And the same,
Right.
that all trickles down and translates into how we show up with everything. We think it's called the hedonic treadmill, just, for anybody who doesn't know. And it's this idea that once we have what we once previously thought would make us feel happy, we reach that. And now there's a new finish line, and the finish line continues to move and to move and to move. And we have to be the ones who say, I'm done moving the finish line. Because
Right.
otherwise, what happens is you see a whole lot of really rich people who are really unhappy. And it is because their
Right.
finish line continues to move and there is never enough. And they will never be happy because they are trying to make happiness show up
Mm.
with stuff. And stuff doesn't make
Right.
us
It's
happy.
it's actually the opposite of the wholeness that you're talking about. It's an
Yeah.
emptiness,
It's an app.
right? Or an
It is a pool that can't be
incompleteness.
filled.
Right. And I've never known, maybe you have or other people listening, and if you have listeners known someone who has this experience, you let me know, but I've never known anyone who gets to their deathbed and says, "Oh, I wish I just had accumulated more stuff."
And if they are that
They
person, I feel
don't.
so sad for them. That's
Right.
really, really sad. No, it's
Right.
not. And, again, to honor full lived experience of people, there's privilege inside this conversation to a point, because studies have shown time and again that money does buy happiness or at least it buys safety is what I would personally say. It buys safety until we have our safety needs met, which means I have a home that's safe. I have food on the table and I don't have to worry about it. I'm not constantly being harassed by creditors, those sorts of things, right?
Right.
So I have food, I have clothing, I have healthcare, I have education for my children, I have shelter. When we have those needs met, which it used to be 70,000 for a family, now it's probably more because of inflation, but there is a number at which we do need money to have, I would say, safety, which creates that feeling of happiness or whatever. But there is a point, and that number is far lower than most people really allow themselves to believe, and certainly that capitalism wants you to believe.
Totally.
But once that number is met, beyond that, we're filling a hole that won't be filled, because it's not about our safety and security anymore. It's about trying to look for happiness through the lens of capitalism, which is through the lens of consumerism. And that's not where happiness comes from, because you're right. Deathbeds, people don't say that. What they say is, I wish I spent more time with people I loved. And it's, the reason why they didn't, because they were too busy trying to accumulate wealth.
Right. Or feeling bad that they weren't.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And again, fully honoring that for many of us, we don't have the privilege to be able to say that, right? Because we're not at the place of the safety and security being met through financial means. So you do have to get there. And I fully honor that, because that message doesn't mean anything if you're not there. But I just would say that this book also speaks to that, because it's going back to this idea of, well, that's all lovely, but I got to pay the bills. Yeah. And sometimes that means we do have to treat ourselves like cogs in the wheel, to pay the bills. And it sucks. I hate that we live in a world where that's true, right? I hate that we live in a world that to have those basic needs met, sometimes we have to treat ourselves like crap. I hate that. And that's the reality. And I don't like books that don't honor that reality, because for some of us, that is our reality. And that needs to be honored too. And in those cases, then it becomes about how can you love yourself through that? Right. And rest is a big part of that. Where can you find those pockets of restorative activities and or actual sleep to give yourself the love and the care that you need as you have to navigate this really crappy world that we live in?
Yeah. Well, I know we could keep having this conversation all day and night, because, well, at this point we have, Becky, over the course of many years.
For sure.
And
we will continue, just not.
Right. This isn't the last conversation we'll have ever. It's just the one in this podcast is going to need to come to an end. Otherwise, it'll be way too long for people to listen to. Although people hang on surprisingly long to these podcasts, which is delightful to me. So I have a few last questions that I like to ask all of my guests. And the first one is, what is one simple way that you rest? So not complicated one. What is something you do for yourself that is restful?
Something I have started this year is embroidery, which makes me sound as old as I am, and I don't care. I started it not so much as a restful in my mind activity, but it was just I need a handcraft that gets me off of the doom scrolling. But I have found it becomes really meditative, and because you have to really focus to be able to do what you're doing. And I love that level of meditation, because it really does, when I can get into that space and I'm not worrying, as somebody who has a lot of anxiety, being able to quiet my mind in that way is very restful for me.
Yeah. So having something tangible and touched that you're focusing on to help you get into a flow state, so to speak. Yeah. So what is a similar question? What is a simple way that you resist all the stuff we've just been talking about? Or maybe there's an example from the book that you can think of, or maybe just some simple thing you do.
Oh, you mean I thought you meant
resist.
I thought you meant resist rest, because I was gonna be I do that constantly.
Oh, that too. I mean, if you want to offer that, you can.
No,
that wasn't the question.
I will just say that I suffer
the
from
system. We'll say
I suffer from, what do they call it? Is it procrastination insomnia, or no? What is it? The kind of insomnia where I stay up even though I know I'm tired, because I'm just this is my time, and then I pay for it later. How do I resist what's happening in the world?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess for me, it's about community spaces that I'm building, because I think, again, going back to this, how do we make each other whole? I think we have to remember that we are having a collective experience. We are humans having this humaning experience, right? We are, as far as we know, the only ones of us doing this thing. And yeah, there's a lot of us, billions, but in the grand scheme of the planet and the I mean the solar system, and when you look at how big existence is, there's not that many of us doing this thing, and we're doing it together, and my ripples, the things I do, ripple out and affect you. And so we have to like learn how to be in community. And capitalism is hyper individualistic. It doesn't do that. And the United States in particular is very hyper individualistic. And so for me, anytime that I am in community space, building those spaces, participating in those spaces, that feels like resistance. It's like saying, no, I am not just going to worry about me, and how do I get mine. I'm going to remember that I am part of a collective experience happening, and that what I do matters to others, and what they do affects me, and that we're going to do that with some degree of intentionality together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we talk about this off and on. I also, speaking of community, hope that we talk off and on about having like our Golden Girls house, like when we're all we're all retired. We're going to have our own version, our retirement plan, because none of us are going to have traditional retirement plans doing this work. But like, how do we create? But it maybe not the accumulating a lot of wealth may not be the only way. Also, to have a secure quote retirement. Just saying.
Collective approaches to life are where it's at. And we as white folks in particular do not learn this for a whole lot of reasons. And we could learn so much from our Black and Indigenous family and friends, because those cultures have understood to survive is a collective experience. And they have taught us so much about what it looks like. And that's, I pull from that wisdom in the book too.
Yeah, that's so cool. I just had to throw that in there because that's a little, I love that idea actually. And I'm like, I want to make that happen. I don't know how to do it, but I want to make it happen.
I've been seeing more and more women doing that, and I love it. Love it.
For sure. So as you've already heard today, and I like to call my community members and listeners rest rebels. And so if you were going to write a note to them or speak a note to them today, dear rest rebels, how would you finish that sentence?
Okay. So I have these cards that are coming out with the book bundle that have reflection questions on the back, and they relate to the key concepts in the book. So I would say, dear rest rebels, you are enough. No proving is required. That's this card. There's others. You could also say, rest rebels, you are worthy, and your value isn't transactional. There's others. And by the way, you'll be happy to know, Nicole, there's one that says, rest is necessary. Life isn't a competition. Because that is a key.
I can't wait to have a set of these cards.
That's a key concept in the book. But so I would say, just like, I think the one that at the core of it for me is I'm enough. I also really love the one that says, I am whole. The system is broken. You're not the problem. It's the system that's the problem. You are whole. So remember that you are, whether it's divinely created or whatever you believe in, you are whole as you are. And you're not what the problem is. It's the system that's the problem. So anything that tries to make you feel like the problem, know that that's the system trying to convince you of that.
Yeah. Go ahead, preach, sister.
That's anything that tries to convince you, just to make it even more specific for your show, anything that tries to convince you or your rest is the problem, that's the system. The system doesn't want you to rest. So your rest isn't the problem. You wanting rest, needing rest, whatever, that's not the problem. The problem is the system that says
Right. Even if you're, and I'm going to say this for my folks who are in like nonprofit work, even if the system is like doing good in the world, quote unquote, if it's extracting from you, it's not doing good in the world. Just adding that on, by the way, in case you were listening to this going, I'm not sure what this has to do with my world. It does, in fact.
All of this does, absolutely.
Yeah, because the habits are there present, whether you have a for-profit business or a nonprofit business, and they're just different forms of business, by the way. And so that's why I think 100%. Liberating your business can apply to all sorts of things. That's a side road I didn't plan to go on, but that's
liberating your life, right? So yes,
this book, whatever your life is, exactly.
The book is written for entrepreneurs, and I would say, and even though I think traditionally employed people, especially in leadership roles, it's really, I think, a valuable book.
For sure.
But really, I think so many of these concepts, because there's a whole first section about mindset that is regardless of whether you're a business owner or not. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in this book because, again, and just be clear, this is pulling from a lineage of thinkers. This is not me trying to say I came up with these concepts. I cite who I've learned from, and most of them are Black and brown and, Indigenous and Black leaders who have taught us so much. And so I'm pulling from all of this wisdom. It's not my wisdom. And so there is wisdom there for all of us.
So I actually borrow this from you, from your, I ask my guests to name an organization doing good in the world that you would want to lift up and that you would invite us to support. And I'll give a small donation as a thank you for being on this podcast. So is there an organization you'd like to lift up? And I also put it on eventually I'll get it on my website. I'm going to have a section of all the great orgs that my guests have lifted up.
Transgender Law Center. That's the organization that I give to. Transgender Law Center is the largest trans-led organization that advocates for self-determination for all people. And so they help trans folks with legal costs and fight for trans laws to support our trans sisters and brothers. So it's an organization I love, and it's transgenderlawcenter.org.
Excellent. We will, I will get that put that in the show notes, of course, and on the website, and give a small donation to that organization as well.
And I will also give a donation, because thank you for reminding me. I don't think I have this year. Last year I was better about automating those things, and they're an organization I give to every year. So Excellent. It's time for me to do that. So thank you for the reminder.
Well, I hope to remind you.
And hopefully the listeners will as well.
Yes, I hope so. So one last thing. How can people find your book? How can people find more about you? How can they follow you? How can they be part of the communities that you form and create?
Well, probably in the show notes, but the easiest thing is BeckyMollenkamp.com. You can spell my name wrong. That's the joy of having a unique name. Google will find me, so don't worry about mingling it. But BeckyMollenkamp.com. If you go to /book, you'll find the book, but it's also just on the top page. But that's where there's links to all the communities that I run, and the spaces and podcasts I host, and all the things I'm doing.
Cool. Yeah, that's the best place to find Becky. My search engine knows what it just puts you in. If I put in like BCKY now,
I love that. Really, it just should for everyone.
Correct. It should.
Nobody names their kid Becky anymore anyway. So it's, old fashioned, so it should be easy to find.
Well, or they're Rebecca's maybe.
I am not a Rebecca, so.
Not a Rebecca. No.
On my birth certificate.
Well, listeners, I really do hope you go out and buy Becky's book. I already have pre-ordered it, which I'm super excited about. I will drop that link to her book, to her website, in the show notes. And this probably isn't the last time you've heard me talking about that. And while we were talking, the other idea I had is like, how about like a book discussion group about your
doing
book?
One-on-one community. I'd love to do another. And also, just quickly on the book, it'll be available in all the places you buy books. You can get it on Barnes & Noble, Bookshop, Amazon, of course. And then also you could ask your library. They can order a copy in. So if they don't have it, they won't, but they can order it in if you request it. But also, just so you know, if you go to my website and order from me directly, I will actually make a little more money on the books. Not that that's the only goal in the world, but if you'd rather I make the money than Amazon, feel free to order directly from me.
And I am all in favor of that.
Right, aren't we all?
Yes.
Exactly.
Like, Jeff Bezos doesn't need another yacht. Let's just
he's doing all right.
He's doing just fine, by the way. So he doesn't need any more of your money.
Right.
Like, just give the extra 50 cents. I don't know what it is, because books.
But also, no shame. If you want to order it through Amazon, you get it quicker than I'll be able to get it to you. So. But
yes, that is totally a thing. It's totally a thing. And that's reminding me, I'm going to request it at my library, because I'm going to be over there tomorrow, as a matter of fact.
I love that.
So I'll mention that to our business and career librarians who I'm friends with.
We love it to be like,
we love a library, don't we?
I do. And I was just thinking the other day, like, the thing that would make me the happiest is seeing it on the shelf at a random Goodwill. Like, that means somebody had it and read it and passed it forward. Yeah. Also, if it ever showed up in the library, I'd be like, oh my gosh, because I'm not requesting it, so somebody else has to. So that'll be very exciting.
Right. I love that.
Anyway.
Well, thank you so much, Becky, for your time and for the energy that you put into this book, and really for the time and energy you put into other small business owners and podcasters and creators for a really, really, really long time. This book is just is a culmination of that work. And that's nothing to sneeze at. And I'm so excited for you and proud of you for doing it, because like you said, it's not easy to get over that hump of saying, well, I couldn't possibly add anything to the conversation, or I don't have enough to say to possibly fill a book or whatever, which is nonsense. You have plenty to say.
I know,
right?
that voice, and by the way, that voice still sits there. So sometimes we have to hear the voice and do the thing anyway.
Right. So if you take nothing else out, listeners, like, hear the voice, do the thing anyway,
Exactly.
and do your truth, and be whole in your own way. You are enough to do that really awesome thing in the world.
You are worthy. You are enough.
You are worthy. Thank you so much, Becky, for being here. I appreciate you so much. And everybody, go buy the book. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Remember, rest is not a retreat from the work we do in the world. It is the work. So if you're ready to rest and resist, here's what to do next. If you know someone who's running on empty, please share it with them. Hit subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss a single episode. Rate and review us so that other radicals can find us. Consider joining us on Substack at defythetrend.substack.com, where you'll find bonus content, tips for everyday living, community connection, and resources to keep you grounded. Radicals, remember, you are worthy of rest.